So we're set for a segment. We're going to talk about other wide receiver cornerback matchups that we enjoyed. And I'm going to talk about this first because there was one that I noticed. So my whole inspiration for the video was one day I was just bored watching YouTube in my bed. Excuse me. Sorry.
Your excuse.
And I was watching Brent Grimes versus Calvin Johnson. That right there was one of my favorite things to watch because that was like my first year, I think. Was that 2014?
2014, yep.
Yeah.
With the one-handed.
Yeah. So there was a lot of stuff. Calvin Johnson touchdown, Brent Grimes one-handed interception. I think Calvin Johnson won the day. But in general, that whole game between those two was a dogfight. And what makes it even better, Brent Grimes is what, 5'9"?
Yeah, he's like 5'9", and Calvin's what, 6'4", 6'5"?
6'5", runs like a 4.3. Brent Grimes is 5. Just the fact that he's 5'9" and held his own against a 6'5" wide receiver is ridiculous. I definitely fumbled by not having that in there. I completely forgot about the whole inspiration for the video because I ended up going with more incidents that had media attention prior to it, besides the D'Angelo Hopkins one, prior, during, or after, because obviously Norman and Odell fought. Ramsey and Odell was week 1 prime time. That was when Ramsey was best corner. Odell was coming off a contract and an injury and was one of the best receivers in the league. Hopkins versus Jalen Hopkins was one of the best receivers in the league. Jalen was a rookie trying to prove himself. And it was, the one I talked about was their second matchup between the two, but basically had the same stats for both. Hopkins had like 40-something yards in both games. But I talked about the second matchup. And so there was a lot of like media stuff going into that. And obviously DeAndre Hopkins was on Hard Knocks. So I kind of just went for the more like incidental ones that had like incidents in them.
Right.
But if I were going strictly off of like dog fights, should have had Brent Grimes and Calvin Johnson, especially considering that was the whole inspiration for my video. There were 2 others that I was going to put in, but I didn't because I didn't watch one of them, like actually watch it. And the other one, I was like, he kind of just dominated him.
Which were they?
So the one I didn't really watch was when AB played against Seattle and just like the whole Legion of Boom defense. And then Calvin Johnson and Patrick Peterson.
That was a good one.
20.
I think it was 2013.
Yeah. Something like that. I couldn't remember the exact year because I didn't end up actually putting it in, so I didn't research it as much as the other ones. But yeah. So mine's Brent Grimes and Calvin Johnson. What's yours?
So my first one, if anybody's listened to the podcast, you might not be surprised. It's Darrelle Revis and Stevie Johnson.
Oh, yeah. I saw you tweet about something like that the other day, too. And we talked about this before.
As we all know, Darrelle Revis was the most shut down corner of all time, basically, especially in that 2009 season. Okay.
I'm sorry. I just remembered something. I was thinking about that tweet and Deion Sanders wasn't in there, but I remembered it's past 25 years.
Jimmy Smith and not Deion Sanders.
I was about to say. I'm sorry. Keep going.
So, yeah, Darrelle Revis, we all see that graphic that everybody tweets out every other week of wide receivers. Darrelle Revis held to fewer than 35 yards. I mean, and it's true. He dominated. He dominated everyone for that whole 2008 through 2011 stretch before he got hurt in 2012, except actually 2 players. I'll get to the other in a minute. Mostly Stevie Johnson. For some reason, Johnson just dominated him every time because he ran his routes like a basketball player. He was basically Kyrie Irving on the football field. He never ran strict routes. He just made a bunch of moves till he got open. And an elite shutdown corner like Darrelle Revis didn't know how to defend that. So in the 2011 game, they played in week 9, the Jets and the Bills. Stevie Johnson had 3 catches for 84 yards, which was the most Revis allowed in a whole 2-year span. And then they played 3 weeks later, and Stevie Johnson had 8 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown, which was the second most yards Revis allowed during that span. And after he scored that touchdown, That was when he mocked Plexico Burress shooting himself in the leg. So it was a funny moment. But the Jets won both games. So maybe you could say they won it, but Stevie had his moments. And then the other guy who famously torched Darrelle Revis in his prime was Ted Ginn Jr., surprisingly. Video podcast. Joe just kind of embarrassed himself. We'll get to that in a minute. But Ted Ginn Jr., the Dolphins and the Jets played a Monday night game in 2009, and Ginn just roasted him for like a 50-plus yard touchdown in the fourth quarter to give the Dolphins the lead, and they won. And that was the year that the Jets made it to the AFC Championship game. And then even a couple years later, in Revis's 1 year with Tampa Bay, and Ginn was with Carolina, he roasted him for a deep touchdown. Now, Joe, I see you have a comment. Let's hear it.
So, for those watching, I put my hand back like Randy Moss back at the end zone. And then this dude had the audacity to say Ted Ginn Jr. I was sitting here like catching it one-handed, like Randy Moss in the middle back at the end zone. No, he brought up Ted Ginn Jr.
I thought about going that, but then I saw you trying to cue me, so I totally had to go for Ted Ginn Jr. But yes,
you gotta say Moss.
No, it crossed my mind, but I was like, nah, let's just go.
But the thing is, right, we can't just think about it from a wide receiver winning the matchup perspective. You got to think about it from like when the corner dominates too. Like another one I was going to put in my video was Adams and Ramsey, but I already had Ramsey in there so much. Like in that playoff game. Anytime Ramsey faces DK. But again, Ramsey, he's just that guy, you know?
Yeah.
And there was another one too. I was going to put Revis Moss. And I wasn't going to talk about one specific game with that because that would just be too biased. Because if I were to talk about a game, it'd obviously be the Randy Moss one-handed catch game.
But I mean, Randy Moss did roast him on that play, but for the majority of it, Revis won.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. So, wait, do you mean for that game or in general?
Both, really.
Yeah, but no. So what I was going to say is like one reason if I were to talk about that one in the video, I was going to just talk about it as a whole over their time being on the Patriots and Jets against each other, because I was like, it would be unfair to talk about one game with those two because of like how much they would play each other in those few years. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the Stevie Revis one is fair. Like Johnson won the matchup in the sense that he dominated a guy who's not regular dominated, but it's not like he popped off for 200 yards or so. Like it was very difficult, and the matchups were always heated. And like Revis hated like the idea that Stevie Johnson was the guy that owned him. Like he would always push back against that in the media whenever he was asked about it. And then the Ted Ginn thing, like he got him a couple times, but Revis owned him. It's Ted Ginn Jr. Like,
yeah, he's not that guy. He can return a punt and a kick, but run a route.
He's not that guy. He's not that guy.
You're not that guy, pal. But you got any other cornerbacks, wide receivers?
There was one other one I wanted to touch on, and it was Antonio Brown and Xavier Rhodes. The Steelers and the Vikings played in 2017.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, it was famous because they were on Mic'd Up. So
it was like I'm toe tap Tony.
Yeah, Tony toe tap. That's
Tony
when
toe
that became popular because he had like 2 or 3 catches on the sideline, and they were like arguing back and forth whether he got his foot down. And I mean, it's Antonio Brown, so he did most of the time. But like they were just going at it back and forth. And AB had 5 catches, 62 yards. That's below his standard, but he still got Rhodes. Like, so it was a genuine back and forth game, and they like dapped it up after the game. So that was,
I mean, 5 for 62 is by no means bad, but it's by no means great. It's just like, that's like unless like Rhodes got an interception or Brown got a touchdown, I would call that strictly even.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we also have to notice, right, is like how much they play zone, because obviously in zone, you're not strictly covering that guy usually. Well, depending on, I mean, you could be running like a deep. And like if they run a deep route, obviously you'll be covering them. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Or how much they actually cover them. Because like, what was it? One of the guys, obviously they didn't cover him the whole game because that's just tiring. But yeah, so I mean, we also have to look at that, see how many targets they had as well, because say they had a lot of targets and only 5. Say they had 13 targets and 5 catches. Cornerback won that. Do you know how many targets Antonio had that game?
Not off the top of my head, but I can look it up.
Yeah.
But you just reminded me about when you mentioned zone players and whatnot. I'm surprised you didn't have it full. I guess it was kind of before your time, but it fits into the theme of your video of like media ones, and that's Richard Sherman and Michael Crabtree.
God damn it, dude. I fumbled that. I know why that video doesn't have a lot of views. It's because I fumbled the bag out of it.
Yeah, AB had 11 targets in that game, so he had 5 for 11.
Yeah, I mean, we also gotta like think about. It's like it can't just be the number of targets. I should say, like, also gotta think about overthrows, because in that Odell Ramsey game, Eli was overthrowing the hell out of him on a good amount of the passes. But dude, yeah, I could have done so much better.
Do a part 2.